When installing a 3R enclosure outdoors in a wet location, there are specific rules regarding the use of knockouts. Factory-made knockouts can be used regardless of their location on the enclosure. You are not limited to only using knockouts that are below the energized parts. Additional knockouts can be made, but there are restrictions on their placement. Specifically, additional knockouts cannot be made above the energized parts within the enclosure. Furthermore, additional knockouts should not be made more than 2/3 of the way out the enclosure. If knockouts are made, watertight fittings or hubs must be used. The use of watertight fittings is mandatory for all knockouts in a wet location to maintain the enclosure's integrity. It is not permissible to use any standard fitting, as this would compromise the enclosure's ability to protect against water ingress. The National Electrical Code provides guidelines for electrical installations in wet locations, and adherence to these guidelines is critical for safety and compliance. When working with electrical enclosures in wet locations, it is important to consider several factors. Firstly, the type of enclosure must be suitable for the environment. A 3R enclosure is designed to provide protection against rain, sleet, and snow, making it appropriate for outdoor use. Secondly, all openings in the enclosure, including knockouts, must be properly sealed to prevent water from entering. Thirdly, the internal components of the enclosure must be protected from moisture and corrosion. The selection of appropriate fittings is essential for maintaining the integrity of the enclosure. Watertight fittings are designed to create a seal between the conduit or cable and the enclosure, preventing water from entering. These fittings typically include a rubber or neoprene gasket that compresses against the enclosure wall when the fitting is tightened. The gasket creates a barrier that prevents water from seeping into the enclosure. In addition to watertight fittings, it is also important to use corrosion-resistant materials for all components of the electrical system. This includes the enclosure itself, as well as the conduit, fittings, and wiring. Corrosion can weaken the components of the electrical system, leading to failures and safety hazards. When making knockouts in an enclosure, it is important to use the proper tools and techniques. Knockout punches are designed to create clean, round holes in the enclosure wall without damaging the surrounding metal. These punches typically consist of a punch, a die, and a draw stud. The punch is placed on one side of the enclosure wall, and the die is placed on the other side. The draw stud is then used to pull the punch through the enclosure wall, creating the knockout. It is important to select the correct size punch and die for the knockout being made. Using the wrong size punch or die can damage the enclosure wall or create a hole that is too large or too small for the fitting. When installing fittings and knockouts, it is important to tighten them properly. Over-tightening fittings can damage the enclosure wall or the fitting itself. Under-tightening fittings can allow water to seep into the enclosure. The manufacturer's instructions should be followed for proper tightening torque. In addition to the above considerations, it is also important to be aware of any local electrical codes or regulations that may apply to the installation. These codes and regulations may specify additional requirements for electrical enclosures in wet locations. It is important to consult with a qualified electrician or electrical inspector to ensure that the installation meets all applicable requirements. The National Electrical Code, or NEC, provides comprehensive guidelines for electrical installations in the United States. The NEC is updated every 3 years, and it is important to stay up to date with the latest edition. The NEC contains numerous articles and sections that address the specific requirements for electrical enclosures in wet locations. Some of the relevant articles include Article 312, which covers cabinets, cutout boxes, and meter socket enclosures, and Article 314, which covers junction boxes, pull boxes, and handheld enclosures. These articles provide detailed information on the construction, installation, and use of electrical enclosures. In addition to the NEC, there may also be state and local electrical codes that apply to the installation. These codes may be more stringent than the NEC, and it is important to comply with all applicable requirements. When working with electrical systems, it is always important to follow safe work practices. This includes wearing appropriate personal protective equipment, such as safety glasses and gloves, and energizing the circuit before working on it. It is also important to be aware of the potential hazards associated with electricity, such as shock and arc flash. If you are not qualified to work on electrical systems, it is important to hire a qualified electrician to perform the work. Improperly installed electrical systems can be dangerous and can lead to fires or other accidents. When installing a 3R enclosure, ensure that it is mounted securely to a stable surface. This will prevent the enclosure from being damaged or dislodged by wind or other environmental factors. The enclosure should also be mounted in a location that is easily accessible for maintenance and inspection. It is important to periodically inspect the enclosure for any signs of damage or corrosion. If any damage is found, it should be repaired promptly to prevent water from entering the enclosure. In addition to the enclosure itself, it is also important to inspect the fittings and wiring for any signs of wear or damage. Worn or damaged fittings should be replaced, and any damaged wiring should be repaired or replaced. Proper maintenance is essential for ensuring the long-term reliability and safety of the electrical system. When working with electrical systems, it is always important to follow the instructions provided by the manufacturer of the equipment. The manufacturer's instructions will provide detailed information on the proper installation, operation, and maintenance of the equipment. Failure to follow the manufacturer's instructions can void the warranty and can lead to equipment failure or safety hazards. In addition to the above considerations, it is also important to be aware of the potential for condensation to form inside the enclosure. Condensation can occur when the temperature inside the enclosure is lower than the temperature outside the enclosure. This can lead to moisture buildup inside the enclosure, which can damage the electrical components. To prevent condensation, it may be necessary to install a breather or drain in the enclosure. A breather allows air to circulate inside the enclosure, which helps to prevent the buildup of moisture. A drain allows any water that does accumulate inside the enclosure to drain out. The selection of the appropriate breather or drain will depend on the specific application and the environmental conditions. When installing a breather or drain, it is important to follow the manufacturer's instructions. The breather or drain should be installed in a location that will allow it to function properly. It is also important to ensure that the breather or drain is protected from damage. In some cases, it may be necessary to install a heater inside the enclosure to prevent condensation. A heater will raise the temperature inside the enclosure, which will help to prevent the buildup of moisture. The selection of the appropriate heater will depend on the size of the enclosure and the environmental conditions. When installing a heater, it is important to follow the manufacturer's instructions. The heater should be installed in a location that will allow it to heat the enclosure evenly. It is also important to ensure that the heater is protected from damage. Proper use of knockouts on a 3R enclosure in wet locations is essential for ensuring the safety and reliability of the electrical system. By following the guidelines outlined above, you can help to prevent water from entering the enclosure and damaging the electrical components. This will help to ensure that the electrical system operates safely and reliably for many years to come. Remember that factory-made knockouts can be used. Knockouts cannot be placed above the energized components or more than 2/3 of the enclosure, and always use watertight fittings when making a knockout. It's worth reiterating the importance of watertight fittings when creating knockouts. These fittings are not just a suggestion, they are a requirement for maintaining the 3R enclosure's protection against wet environments. The absence of watertight fittings can lead to water ingress, which can cause corrosion, short circuits, and potentially hazardous situations. It's also a good practice to periodically inspect these fittings to ensure they remain properly sealed and haven't deteriorated over time due to weather exposure or other factors. When considering the placement of knockouts, think about the functionality and safety of the entire installation. While you have the freedom to use factory-made knockouts regardless of location, and to create additional knockouts within the specified limits, consider how the placement of these knockouts will affect wire routing and overall accessibility for future maintenance or modifications. Strategically placed knockouts can make the installation and upkeep of the electrical system much easier and more efficient. When selecting watertight fittings, ensure they are compatible with the conduit or cable being used. Different types of conduits and cables require specific types of fittings to create a proper seal. For example, rigid metal conduit requires different fittings than flexible metal conduit or non-metallic cable. Consulting the manufacturer's specifications or a qualified electrician can help ensure you select the correct fittings for your application. Additionally, be mindful of the materials used in the construction of the fittings. In corrosive environments such as those near saltwater, it's crucial to use fittings made from corrosion-resistant materials like stainless steel or specialized plastics. These materials will withstand the harsh conditions and prevent premature failure of the fittings, ensuring the long-term integrity of the enclosure. When making knockouts, be precise and avoid creating oversized or irregular holes. Using the correct knockout punch or tool is essential for creating clean, round holes that will properly accommodate the fittings. Oversized or irregular holes can compromise the seal between the fitting and the enclosure, allowing water to seep in. If an oversized hole is accidentally created, it may be necessary to use a larger fitting with a wider sealing surface or to repair the enclosure before installing the fitting. Remember, the goal is to maintain a watertight seal to protect the electrical components inside the enclosure. In addition to the physical aspects of knockout placement and fitting selection, it's also important to consider the electrical codes and standards that govern these installations. The NEC, as well as local electrical codes, provide specific requirements for enclosures in wet locations. Familiarize yourself with these requirements and ensure that your installation complies with all applicable regulations. This may involve consulting with a qualified electrician or electrical inspector to ensure that your work meets the necessary standards. Keep in mind that electrical codes are designed to protect people and property from electrical hazards. By following these codes, you are contributing to a safer and more reliable electrical system. Finally, don't underestimate the importance of proper documentation. Keep a record of all knockouts made, fittings used, and any modifications made to the enclosure. This documentation can be invaluable for future maintenance, troubleshooting, or inspections. It can also help ensure that any future work on the enclosure is performed correctly and in accordance with applicable codes and standards. By maintaining accurate records, you are contributing to the long-term safety and reliability of the electrical system.